But everywhere I've moved since I left Pennsylvania, nobody knows what I'm talking about. All right, so here's how this is going to go. I'm going to hand it over. Well, first I'm going to give you a little spiel about 1789 in case you don't know much about it. A lot of you were on the first call, so we can do that really quick. I'm going to throw a link to our website into the chat so you can check it out. That's where you'll find all the mentors that are involved in the Meet the Mentor series. This is the second of the 4 session series, and today we have Collin McKinney, and we have Ethan, and we have Nikki joining us. So thank you to our mentors that take time out of their busy day to tell us a little bit more about themselves. The goal of these sessions is just to get to know these individuals a little more and hopefully encourage you to reach out and schedule one-on-one sessions, maybe immediately if you have a need, maybe in the future when something comes up. So I'm going to share my screen. Just so you know where to find more information about 1789 and these mentors, if you click the resources tab at 1789hub.com, that's where you will find the now virtual mentors. And you'll find under this virtual mentors tab, they're organized by category in whatever it is that their office hours are related to. Nobody has office hours anymore. I don't imagine bringing that back in the fall. I think that everybody would just remain available virtually, and it seems that most of our mentors prefer you just shoot them an email if you want to have a one-on-one chat. If you want to get to know a little bit more about them from the office hours, you could click a link, or you could go under Get to Know Us and Mentors, and you'll find little bios under there. If you would like to join the 1789 community, all students are welcome. You have some interest in innovation or entrepreneurship, you might have a current venture, you might have an idea, you might just be interested in working for a startup someday. You're more than welcome to join us by clicking the Join the Community button, filling out that form, and then you'll attend a virtual orientation with one of my mentors where they'll give you more details about the physical space and how that's going to work in the fall somehow, and also just different ways that you can get involved virtually, because that's what I've been at home trying to figure out. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to the mentors and ask them to tell us their name and their job and what sort of things that they have helped students with in the past, or what sort of things that they would like to and are able to help students with, because that's really what their experience or passion is related to. And then I'm gonna pass it over to the students to come up with some questions for one of the mentors or all of the mentors. I will ask the mentors to keep their answers fairly brief. I figure if we do 2 to 3 minutes of talking per question, we can get through 5 or 6 individual questions. And I will challenge the students, if you're more quiet, to unmute yourself and speak up. And if you are someone that talks a lot, to maybe step back and listen more. And what you can do is raise your virtual hand when you have a question ready. That way I can keep some sort of rhythm to this, and I'll call on students in the order that their little virtual hands pop up over here in the chat screen. So how about Nikki, do you want to start by telling us who you are and what you do and why you're a mentor at 1789?
Sure. So, hey everyone, I'm Niki Shamdasan. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Sani, a South Asian inspired fashion brand. I graduated from UNC in 2015, did a very brief stint in consulting, and then went on to work at Matter, which was a startup accelerator for early stage media companies. And while I was there, I focused on teaching startups how to use storytelling and design thinking for maximum impact. And so was able to translate hopefully some of that over to Sani, and now that's what I focus on as a mentor at 1789, how to use storytelling, how to leverage it to, whether that's pitching to an investor, a customer, or even thinking about your personal brand. And I have helped people with sort of design thinking and brainstorming along the way. So as you all know, as a startup founder, you have to do a bit of everything. And so I'm always happy to kind of be a thought partner where you need it along the way.
Great, thanks, Nikki. I think it just came to mind. I might be wrong, but you might be the only mentor that has a current active startup. I know there's a lot that have had startups in the past, but you might be the only one that has the current. So
cool.
Thanks, Nikki.
Yeah.
Ethan.
Okay. Nice to meet you, Nikki, by the way. I don't think we've met before. So yeah, so Ethan Peikes, graduated UNC 2018. So honestly, I may have overlapped with some of you. But I graduated from Keenan Flagler with a concentration in entrepreneurship, and decided to pursue venture capital, and primarily interested in bringing new innovations, new technologies to market, which is, the entrepreneurial ecosystem, and venture capital is a good way to do that. So my primary role within 1789 is mentoring on the fundraising aspect. So obviously, I've gotten a good bit of experience analyzing startups at our fund, and that's what I guess that's where I can add the most value to you all. So always happy to answer any questions, or set up a time to chat virtually, at least in the interim, but hopefully in person at some point down the line.
Thanks, Ethan. All right, and Colin.
Great. Yeah, I'm Collin McKinney. And can you hear me? Did it
Yes.
come up? Yeah, coming up. Okay, it didn't look like it was switching there. I'm the director of the electronics core over in the chemistry department. We just happen to be in chemistry. We don't do all chemistry. We do all kinds of electronics, applied electronics. I was just telling the other folks before the meeting started that I'm working on a tissue engineering project where we are subjecting tissue to ultrasound to make it more viable for implantation. And, our projects span from DNA sequencing to mass spectrometry for weapons detection, and just a whole wide range of things. And we have several initiatives going on. And the reason I bring these up, because these are the areas that we can help you with specifically. We have something called the Data Space Initiative that's just getting off the ground. And what that is it's a maker space for data. So people that have data sets that want to learn how to manipulate them, how to display them, how to collect data from electronic devices or monitoring devices and get it into the cloud, all of those kinds of things. We have a nano device characterization lab where we electronically characterize new devices that people are making around campus and need to classify them or to figure out how good or how bad they are. We also have a brand new lab that we're setting up called the Chemistry Automation Lab, and it's a lab where we have AI algorithms that can help you determine new molecules based on your desired properties. So basically, you feed these algorithms properties that you'd like to have. Those might be pharmaceutical properties, they might be physical properties, whatever. The AI then spits out a group of these molecules, and then the automation lab synthesizes those molecules and tests them and feeds that information back to the AI. So lots of interactive things going on. I'm an entrepreneur as well, so I have just sold a recording studio in Durham a couple of years ago. So my interests span a lot of things. I also have a consulting company. You can see a lot of the stuff that's going on here that I'm sharing now, working from home with the university and the company and things like that, where we do medical device development. And my team at UNC and I have, good experience with engineering business issues. So there are a lot of things that you may not think about in starting a business that are related to the engineering part. And those are generally have financial impacts. And there's a lot of regulatory issues, especially if you're into medical devices. And we can help you prepare for those and navigate through those kinds of things. So reason I'm in 1789, probably the best part of my job is working with students. And so any opportunity that I get to do that is wonderful. So here I am.
Great. Thank you, Colin. And we're so happy to have Colin from the Critical Lab at 1789, because anyone that needs to build anything, I just say they should go talk to Colin. So as you can see, 3 different mentors, 3 very different backgrounds and experiences, but all tied to innovation and entrepreneurship. So that's what I love about the group of mentors that we have. So at this point in time, I forgot to challenge you to scribble down as many questions as you could think of during the time that they were explaining, but hopefully some things popped in your mind. So I would love to know. Oh, yes. Thank you, Eleanor. Special thanks to Eleanor and Jackie and the whole CUBE team for helping all the time. And Eleanor is going to take some great notes, and I'll be sure to send those out to everyone after the meeting. She did that last session, and it was very helpful. So if anybody has a question, there's no virtual hand raised, so you can go ahead and unmute. And if you think of something while somebody else is talking, please click your virtual hand so we can get a list of people ready to ask some questions.
Are we still allowed to just ask questions this way? Or?
Sure.
I have a question for Colin. I am very interested in the data space. So you talked about there being some kind of maker space. I'm very curious about that.
Sure. Yeah, it's just getting off the ground. We have a space in the bottom of Keenan Labs that one way to access that space in the coming months will be through CAD, the student data science organization, because they'll be using that for workshops and that sort of thing. Where the plans for that are to as a makerspace, we want it to be have a low threshold of walking in the door, right? You don't have to come take a 4-hour for credit course to get started. But eventually we'll have data sets, practice data sets. We hope to fund a data observatory at some point so that you can display data. We're hoping to get the humanities involved. Of course, my love of music and performance art and that sort of thing. We'd love to see the data space used in that way, right? Everything is data. Music is, is data. You can convert it to electronic signals, right? So all of those things can be analyzed for various aspects and then used in real time for display and things. So we're also involved with some folks in archaeology. They're looking at taking data from drones and pulling that up, getting it up on the cloud and that sort of thing. And so there'll be involvement in all of those things for students that are interested. We're working on getting funding for internships in the data space. So that's a great place for people that have some data knowledge to help their fellow students and help maintain the data space. So that's it in a nutshell.
Great, thanks, Colin. I think there's a question for Nikki in the chat. Naya, is it Naya? Am I saying it right?
Nia,
I'll hand it over to you. You guys don't have to type your whole question in there if you don't want to. You can just, under the chat, raise your virtual hand, and then I'll just call your name, and you can voice it instead of type it. But whatever you prefer, whatever's easy.
Sure. So my question was regarding storyboarding from the perception of the buyer versus the end user. The buyer for us being the hospital systems, and the end users being the patients, physicians, and nurses. And they really have two different stories, two different objectives. But how do we reach, I guess, the payer with our story?
Yeah, that's a great question. And for us, so we're in a similar situation in terms of like our users are first generation South Asian American women, but the customers are typically their moms. So we're also kind of talking to two different people during the process. Now, your users versus buyers are a bit different, but I think the best way to kind of start mapping it out is to go from like, discovery to onboarding for each of these different kind of categories, and to think about, okay, so what is the first step for how I reach out to, I think you said, the hospital as the payer. Is it via LinkedIn? Is it some other place? And to have metrics at each of those points. So, I will be reaching out to these many hospitals per day or whatever it might be.
Okay.
There, I'm going to have a conversation with each of them about, what we can offer and so on, and to build out the story through that flow. And what you'll very quickly discover is also, as you're talking to all sides, you'll see that they use different words for how they respond to what you're delivering. Like you may hear, I really like this aspect of your product, or I don't think we can come on board because we are tied into these contracts, or whatever it might be. I'm not totally sure what your product is, and we can totally talk about that more after this. But take those words as you're having these conversations and use them to update this flow that you're creating for the buyer versus the end user. And so it's something to constantly refine. We still are constantly refining it on our end, especially as, one of our touch points for the moms was a lot of the in-person experiences that we were doing, which aren't happening right now. And so we had to change, okay, so now how do we tell the story? How do we guide them through the funnel in the new world? Does that make sense?
Yes, that does. Thank you very much.
Andrew, I'll turn it over to you. I skipped you, sorry.
Oh, you're okay. Mine's Colin, just yes or no, really, and we can talk offline. But are you able, you said you spoke to helping with regulatory things in regards to medical devices, but helping with clinical trial design and IDE submission, is that something you can facilitate?
We can facilitate, but most of our activity is with like 510K approvals and the pre-approval processes that are required of the software and hardware when you're doing prototypes, and also the prototype development itself, right? If you're going to do clinical trials, you have to have the hardware to get into the clinical sites to use, and we can provide that. We can manufacture that hardware to get it into the clinical sites. Yeah.
But the you can really only help, like your experience is really only helping through the 510K platform, right, and not like the de novo technology.
Yeah, not the clinical trial design. Yeah. No, we're not a CRO. But yeah, good question. Yeah.
I have a question that any or all of the mentors could speak to. What was your journey to your current role? Maybe speak a little bit about your experience in college and how you sort of end up where you are today, and if you saw that coming or if it was a little bit of a surprise.
I'll jump in since I haven't gotten to talk yet. So I don't even know if I said my company at the beginning. I work for a seed and early stage venture firm called Idea Fund Partners in Durham. It's currently investing out of about a $25 million fund. And so the way I actually got introduced was through a class at UNC. called Venture Capital and Startups. My predecessor actually came in to speak to the class on his way out of the job. And so they were looking for somebody, and I thought it sounded interesting. And my professor was nice enough to make an introduction. They're a small firm, so the hiring can be an antiquated process, but sort of just, harassed them once every couple of months to see if they were ready to, make a move on that yet. And a year and a half later, here I am. So it was an interesting roundabout way of sort of getting introduced.
Thank you, Ethan.
Yeah, and for me, I definitely never, ever thought I would go into fashion. I mean, I studied political science and business. Not that what you study is tied to what you do, but that's pretty, political science is pretty far off. For me, it was really just about problem solving. So with consulting, it was like, let me be able to go into, in my case, federal agencies and, be able to dissect these problems, but I missed the implementation side of things. And so then going to the startup accelerator, getting to be there, like working with the startups to, help them through various things and see, what their journees were like. That was really interesting. And Sani then really happened organically from there. It was meant to be a side project at the very beginning. And so we kind of just took one step at a time, released our first collection, got a really good response. And I was like, all right, let me leave New York, come back to North Carolina to do this with my co-founder, AKA my little sister who was in high school at the time here. And it really went from there, kind of just one step at a time.
And how long ago was that?
That was 3 years ago now.
Jessica, I'll let you ask your question. That's a great one.
Yeah, hi, thank you. So this is for any mentors to answer. So since you need a pretty broad skill set when working on a startup, what skills would you say have helped you the most, especially that you learned in undergrad, or what skills do you wish that you had learned?
I can go. So for me, one was using my student visa as much as possible. And of course, that's not as applicable now because I don't have a UNC email address, but kind of leveraging the moment you might be in, even if you don't think it's an advantageous position, to ask for help. And I honestly stopped doing that for a while after graduating, like reaching out to new people, asking for help, learning from people, just because I wasn't in the same environment of constantly being exposed to new people. And so, you have to take the initiative afterwards to reach out and continue to learn from others. And I think, I wish I had taken more of that after graduation as well.
And I'd like to echo what Nikki said. I think that's great. You have to put in the work in school. For example, when I was in school, I had decided at my second year that I wanted to do some kind of undergraduate research, and that was not a thing back in the day. So I had decided, and it was so strongly inbred in me that I basically said, if I can't find something by next semester, I'm going to go to another school. And I would basically tackle faculty members in the hall to ask them questions, whether they wanted to or not. And it turned out most people were very happy to help and that sort of thing. So again, what Nikki said, take advantage of your opportunities and the opportunities here at UNC, but don't sit back. They're not going to fall in your lap. You need to pursue them. And even if you don't know what to pursue, hey, there's a good thing to pursue. Go find a faculty member that can help you with that, right? So yeah, definitely grab it and do it.
Yeah, not to be redundant, I think Colin and Nikki kind of hit the nail on the head, but I think more broadly, especially in the startup world, but in any job that you pursue, I think the key is being proactive instead of reactive. And so the way I think of that in the startup context is like stuff is going to break, or your anticipated lead investor is going to have some issue with allocation at the last minute and not be able to come in. And so sort of, always being wired to think about those problems in advance and have solutions ready, because by the time it actually hits, if you haven't thought about that yet, it's probably going to be too late. So yeah, that's going to help you in no matter what career path you go down, but just having that mindset to anticipate and be proactive instead of reactive.
Thank you.
Kimmy, I have a question that
Sure.
I think I've seen ongoing from some of the students. And it's super broad. So the mentors can approach it in so many different ways. It's just one word, fundraising, raising funds. I hear a lot of students, and Kimmy, you know this too, just wanting to learn how to better pitch, how to craft, grant proposals. And, it's such a huge thing to talk about, but I feel like the people who are speaking today may have some insight to share with regards to this topic. And I know that there's probably like 5,000 and more things you could share, but if you could just choose one, I'd love to hear it myself too.
Can take a crack at it. So I think from my perspective, the biggest thing, and Nikki kind of spoke to it a little bit before, is crafting a story. And the way that I like to think about it is sort of going in order, right? Like, what's the problem you're trying to address, and how big is that problem, both in terms of like whatever metric, whether it's dollars, but also just like how difficult of a pain point is it for the end user or the customer that you're trying to service. Why is your solution the right solution, and how difficult would it be to replicate that solution? That's sort of my view of it from like the VC side of it. And and then there's other details, right, that we can go, right, like talk to me about your team, how big is the market opportunity here, et cetera, et cetera. But those three things, I think, are the biggest thing that people who are, investing their money are going to want to have a lot of conviction around.
Yeah, and for us, so we've not raised any VC money, but we've done a mixture of bootstrapping, and then we've also taken on non-dilutive funding, like through places like NC Idea. And so, you're still pitching to them in a similar way. And I think for us, it's been really important to have a really user-driven narrative to start with. And part of that is, the demographics in the room usually aren't South Asian women, like the people that we're pitching to. And so, having to communicate the size of the problem, like it's not immediately apparent to someone else. And I think for, even other companies as well that might be operating in niche industries, or you're just doing something new, right? Like that's going to be the case as well. You have to show someone that you are tackling a big problem, like Ethan was saying. But I think like grounding it in one user's journey has been really helpful for us in illustrating that. And so going from like here to then, all right, now at a global level, or for us, like in North America in general, this is the scope of the problem. This is the size of the problem. So yeah, that's been helpful for us.
I think I don't even remember what the saying is basically, but you don't know anything till you've walked in somebody else's shoes. And what you have to understand in fundraising is you have to put yourself in those people's shoes that you're asking to fund your work. what's going to make them part with their money? You should be your biggest critic. You should be able to put yourself in their shoes and ask those critical questions of your idea. Because if you're not willing to part with your hard-earned money, they're not going to be willing to do that. And so I think just putting yourself into that, what is required to convince person X to invest time or money or whatever into an entrepreneurial venture. The second thing I have to say is that grants are great. They're non-dilutive to your startup. They're a wonderful way to get your company off the ground. And guess what? The world's best experts in raising grant funds are right here on campus. You know, if you look at the total research dollars coming into UNC, it's huge. We're way up on the scale. So all the experts you need in any topical area are right here. Talk to us, talk to them, whoever.
Great. So to follow up on that, a lot of you did mention grants or small funds as opposed to VCs at first, at least for early stage, and that's probably most of these student ventures. Any tips or tricks or encouraging words as far as where to find those grants and small pots of money that students can put together to really make something happen? And any advice on when maybe, Nikki, you realized, like, you must have gotten some no's before you got some yeses. So I just wonder if you have any advice on when the venture's ready to pitch for funding.
Yeah, so we applied for the NC Idea micro grant a little less than a year after we started, and I definitely thought that was too soon, because I was like, we're still figuring out how to get to customers and all that. I mean, you know, we didn't have anything figured out, and I mean, we're still figuring things out, but it just felt like we were way too early. But I'd encourage you to apply for things when you think it's way too early, because it may not be in someone else's eyes, or going through the process will force you to think about things in a really positive way that helps you whether or not you end up getting the grant. And in addition to that, so now we've applied for the NC Idea seed grant 2 times. We haven't gotten it, but we've gotten one stage farther each time we've applied. And you know what? I'm going to keep applying because it just is so important to help us with our progress. And I see it every application cycle. And it also shows the NC Idea people, we're interested, we're here, like we're ready for it. And so, yeah, I mean, tips and tricks, really, like, do it, right? And every time you'll see that your application gets better and better, you'll always ask for feedback. Most of the grants that we've applied to, they'll say something, unless, you know, they were just totally inundated with applications. But, you know, use that to figure out what your next step should be for that next application. And I've found some grants through I Fund Women, through Girl Boss, the organization, which I think might be shutting down now, and a bunch of these other, you know, different places that are trying to help entrepreneurs. So I'd sign up for a bunch of their newsletters, and they tend to send things along, including Innovate Carolina. You all always have opportunities in the newsletters as well. So that's really helpful.
Yep, good point. If you're not on the Innovate Carolina newsletter, anything that comes to me or Cheryl or really anyone on our team, since we're kind of like in our own projects often, we push to our communications team to put in that newsletter. So make sure you are getting that every Monday by going to innovate.unc.edu. And at the top, there's a newsletter tab. You throw your email address in there. But Nikki, yeah, thanks for that answer. If Ethan or Colin have anything, please jump in. That actually, your answer, Nikki, made me feel a lot better as someone that, you know, sits on the review boards to make decisions about who gets funding and who doesn't. And it's hard to say no sometimes, and it's hard to make those decisions. And I like to think that sometimes the no is even though the venture's not getting money, sometimes a no can actually push that venture to do better than a yes with some dollars. And I really believe that. So.
Yeah, and if I can just add something, so I work at a VC, obviously, so my expertise isn't in non-dilutive funding, but we, just for context, we see about 1,200 companies a year, and on average, we invest in 5. So that 6th company is still in the top half of 1% or something like that, and that they wouldn't know that, right? So a key thing is just, when in terms of fundraising, I think, is your mindset. I think Nikki's mindset is great. It's all a learning opportunity, and you guys are getting further each time, and rejection just doesn't mean that you're doing anything wrong. It just means often that, from a VC perspective, often it's not a fund fit, as we say, or sometimes there's just a company that's a little bit further along that's proven out their model a little bit more. So take that as you got to develop some thick skin in that sense, and make sure you understand that rejection is not a bad thing. It doesn't mean that you don't bring value, or your company doesn't bring value. It's just often the way it goes, unfortunately.
Great. Okay, Michael, I see your virtual hand. I'm sorry it took me so long.
Oh, no worries. I was just wondering, Ethan, you mentioned the venture capital class. That's one I was looking at. Is that one that you recommend?
Yeah, definitely. Patrick Vernon, I think, still teaches that class. And it's an awesome class. It was my favorite class in college, and it's a very hands-on class. So the way it's structured is that he brings in actual startups to pitch, and you assess them from a venture capitalist perspective. So yeah, I think it's generally relatively competitive to get into, but if you're able to take it, I definitely recommend it. And Patrick's a great guy. He's a friend of mine that I still am in contact with pretty regularly. So definitely recommend.
Great, thanks.
All right, we have about 15 more minutes if anybody else has anything on their mind. Otherwise, I'm going to flip the script and ask the mentors if there's anything they want to learn about the students that are in the room.
Sure. Anybody working on widgets out there?
Well, there's no way. There's no one. I'm trying to see. We got Lyra. We got Ant. Is there really no widget venture in the room? That never happens.
Kimmy, I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like I come in with all these questions. But I've been talking with students and hearing some of their questions, and feel like it's worthy of me to advocate for them too by bringing them
Absolutely.
up. Two things that come to mind for me. One is a lot of students, I feel like, and myself included, always struggle with feedback and knowing which ones to really take, and just how to go through that, right? So go through receiving feedback and being like, okay, which one do I take? Which one do I not take? How to go about doing that. So the way to do that. So that's one of my questions. And then the other one is how do you learn to trust yourself, right? So with getting all that feedback, it's so easy to start questioning your idea and yourself, all these things. So how do you learn to trust yourself? Especially I'm seeing Nikki right now, because I know that you said you're putting yourself out there. So one is how to navigate our best way to approach getting feedback, and two, in the midst of that, how do you still learn to trust yourself so that you can go out there and pitch it once again, and feel like you're the person to do that.
Thanks, Jackie. I don't have the answers, but I'll give it my best shot just from my personal perspective. In terms of feedback, I definitely don't do a great job of this. I tend to be the type of person when, if I'm stuck, I talk to 5 different people about it, and they'll all have their own opinions, and then I leave feeling even more confused than before. And ultimately I have a co-founder, my sister, and so we'll talk it out and figure something out, and she's often the one that's I'd say helps balance me out a little bit in terms of her conviction sometimes. And it's funny because she's 19, right? And so I'm like, what do you know as a 19-year-old? Which, maybe many of the people on this call feel, but I think for us, it's about, okay, if we're going to take this feedback, maybe this is the one thing that seems to resonate the most, I'm not sure, but then how can we evaluate if this is working? How can we actually do a proper job of testing this? And, if it doesn't work, then what's plan B? What's plan C? And so just kind of coming up with if-thens in a way, kind of helps me think through the feedback, and also thinking through what is going to how much effort is this going to require, and how much of an impact can it have, and kind of trying to place things that way on a grid. That's been really helpful for me, but again, I know that we don't always implement feedback in the best way or take the right feedback. And then in terms of just how to trust yourself, I don't trust myself at all still when I'm applying for these things. I think it's just fake it till you make it. And that's just what I have to tell myself every day. And that if it's meant to happen, it doesn't mean it's going to be easy, which I know at the very beginning of Sani, I was like, we have this issue and this issue and this issue, and it just feels like it's not meant to be. And, after talking to a lot of other business owners, I just realized how problematic a mindset that was. If it's meant to be, or if we're successful, it's only going to get harder. The challenges are only going to get bigger. That's ingrained in this. And, ultimately, even if you don't feel like you have all of the skill sets and everything needed to supercharge this thing, all you can do is keep trying and keep taking, again, one step at a time. So sorry, I know that's not a great answer, but that's just how I try to think through it.
Well, and I look at it this way. So, when you go looking for feedback, you try to seek out experts that can give you good feedback. But guess what? Every one of you out there is an expert in something. And I hope you're an expert in your idea, in what you're trying to do. And if you are, you need to trust yourself. You need to trust yourself to make yourself that expert. And then feedback becomes a little different in the way you treat it. Because guess what? You are the expert in it. And you're making yourself the expert in it. So just keep that in mind. If you, as all of us, get drugged down when you get feedback, especially bad or complex feedback, you can make your way through it, and you'll come out on the other side of the feedback.
Yeah, and I would just add, I think it's a good question, because there's kind of 2 components to it, where you want to be coachable and receptive to feedback. And you also, don't want to lose sight of your vision. One thing I think to keep in mind is that everyone who's giving you feedback is getting feedback also. So we give feedback to entrepreneurs all the time on their technology, their model, whatever. Most of the time we've had to go talk to some subject matter expert because we don't actually know what we're talking about. So because that's just not really, we're not specialists in LiDAR technology or whatever, right? So keep that in mind. And honestly, write down a list of what you think your strengths and weaknesses are. It may seem like a silly exercise, but, understand where you think you need the most feedback and the most help, and understand where, you have confidence in yourself, and to your point, you do trust yourself. I think it's hard to trust yourself 100% of the time, but there's certain areas where you probably have conviction that you know what you're doing and that you know what you're talking about, and never stray too far from your vision and what you're trying to build, I guess.
Can I add something too, even though I'm not a mentor?
Absolutely.
Okay, perfect. I also think like currently I've been seeing a lot about how like everyone knows how to critique, but not everyone knows how to like put things into action. And so like honestly for me, like I constantly get inspired by like the students that I work with in my position as an intern, because I see you all doing things that I've never imagined before, I've never thought of before. So just like as like a positive note, like I'm inspired by y'all. Like you are people that I would want to get feedback from. You are people that I would want to learn from and that I learn from every day. I know that's not like a particular like advice, but I just want to put that out there that like you're already like being the greatest, you're your greatest critic, but also there are people who are always backing you and always wanting to make sure that you succeed.
Thanks, Eleanor. I agree. I think that the college environment kind of creates this setting where there should be like a student and a teacher, but the truth is that we are all learning off of each other. And I, like Eleanor, am super impressed with the student venture ideas and things that I could never come up with or I could never do. So sometimes there might be some feedback that you take with a grain of salt because it doesn't help you, right, be a better person or a better venture. And you really latch on to that what does help and those who are supportive and helpful. All right, we have 8 minutes left, so a little bit of time for any last minute thoughts or questions from the mentors or staff or students.
I'll throw a really vague one out there. In addition to just mentorship in our fields of expertise, how can we be helpful to you all? What are some things that, you know, that maybe is not necessarily in our description on the 1789 website that we can do to be supportive of you all?
I think I have sort of an interesting thing. So in entrepreneurship, we always talk about the ups and the downs, but we don't necessarily get into the, okay, this is the hardship, this is how I deal with failure type of thing, and just being an entrepreneur from an actual person point of view. So I know that statistically it's said that we get more depression and we have a higher suicide rate. So dealing with things that aren't necessarily tangible and that have to do with the business. So maybe like the mental health side. Tyrell, how are you doing today outside of being Ante? If that makes any sense.
That makes a lot of sense. So my background's actually in psychology, and I was a licensed counselor before I somehow ended up in the world of innovation entrepreneurship. So what you touched on, Tyrell, is really important to me, and I'm glad you brought it up. I would love students to reach out to our mentors to schedule chats, even if they might not have a specific technical question about their venture. And I work hard to make sure the mentors are people that I think would love to have that conversation with you. They're not going to leave and be like, well, they didn't even have a specific question about their venture. But beyond that, I want to work in some holistic, if you will, programming into the fall semester at 1789. Now that we're all virtual, it's really hard to meet those social needs and those fun needs and really build a community. So I'm looking forward to putting some things on the calendar that you might look at and say that has nothing to do with innovation or entrepreneurship, and it doesn't, and that's okay, because we still need to hang out with each other and see how each other are doing and create an environment where we feel comfortable to reach out if we do need something and it's not specific to our venture.
Yeah, and thanks for bringing that up, Tyrell. I think that's a great point and something that doesn't immediately come to mind, but obviously you need to take care of yourself first in no matter what you're doing, but especially as an entrepreneur. I mean, if you're not taking care of your mental health, like how are you going to go sell your product and fundraise and all of that? And so I do think that's very helpful feedback for us, because it may not be, front of mind at all times, but it's just as important, probably more important than anything else. So thank you for that.
Absolutely. And echoing what Kimmy said in terms of like, always feel free to reach out. I know something really helpful for me is getting to talk to other people that are going through the same thing. Not even people who are 5 years ahead, 10 years ahead, who had to deal with this before, but who are in it right now. And in addition to that, this is a very basic thing, but even when I was exercising or doing something else like that for self-care at the beginning, I'd be on my phone, checking my email, doing something. Even if it wasn't that productive, I felt like I always had to be on, and that I had to be like in Sani mode all the time, because you hear all of this, like, you hear about this hustle culture that if you're not working 24/7, then you're not going to have a successful startup. And I had to very intentionally detach myself from that. And so, now when I am working out or, whatever, when I'm with my family, like, I put my phone to the side. Otherwise I would be checking it. Like, I have to put it far away from myself so that I'm not checking it. And I hope there will come a point where I can just, turn off at some point, but like right now it has to be physically, away. So I encourage you to see how you can take those moments during your day also, just really be you and not you as this business owner.
Okay, well, that about wraps it up. I'm going to go ahead and put a link in the chat right now for the next session. That will be 2 weeks from today, 3 different mentors, and then there is the final one 2 weeks from that session. So that'd be the end of July. And I'm working on, like I mentioned, I'm working on fall programming for 1789 now, and interested in potentially continuing something like this, even if it's not as frequently, maybe just once a month, to get any students and mentors in to have discussions like this, because I think it's really helpful. So if you have any feedback, any suggestions, I'm totally open. Please shoot me an email or any other questions about becoming a member of 1789. And remember that you can find the individual email addresses of Colin, Nikki, and Ethan on the 1789 website. And you can shoot them an email if you want to set something up one-on-one. And thanks again, Eleanor, for taking notes. I'll be following up to everyone that registered for this session with those notes. And there's a recording too, and I believe our comms team is working on editing these so we can post them on our website. So more to come on all of that as we all continue to work from home.
Thank you, Kimmy. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Kimmy.
Thank you.
Yes,
Thank
thanks,
you.
Colin and Nikki
Thanks
and
a lot.
Ethan for joining us.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks for all the questions. Good to meet you.
Yes.